Buckingham Palace that morning was immersed in an unusual silence. No ceremonial music, no military band, no flags flying against the heavy gray London sky. Journalists stood shoulder to shoulder outside the iron gates, yet no one dared to speak. They sensed that what was about to happen was not a routine announcement from the British royal family. The great doors opened. King Charles appeared. He was not wearing a crown, not dressed in coronation robes, and most importantly, Queen Camilla was not standing beside him as she usually was. That single detail alone was enough to make the entire room hold its breath. King Charles stood upright. His face was calm in a way that was almost frightening. No trembling, no hesitation. And then with just one short statement, he shook the foundations of more than 1,000 years of British monarchy. He announced his abdication, not because of an accident, not because of political pressure, not because of a critical illness as previously rumored. This was a calculated decision, cold and entirely voluntary. Immediately afterward, an even more shocking declaration was released. All royal titles held by Queen Camilla were stripped away, without exception, without negotiation. In that moment, the entire world asked the same question. Was this the final noble act of a king who placed the institution above love? Or the coldest act of revenge ever concealed beneath the moral language of royalty? If you believe King Charles did this for justice, comment number 1. If you think this was revenge disguised as responsibility, comment number 2. Because to understand why a king would willingly end his own reign, we must return to the moment when everything first began to fracture. The instant King Charles concluded his speech, the room inside Buckingham Palace fell into a state of near absolute silence. No murmurs, no immediate questions. Even the most seasoned reporters stood frozen as if they had just heard something that lay beyond every scenario they had prepared for. Just seconds later, that silence shattered. In less than a minute, major news agencies issued simultaneous breaking alerts. The phone screens of international editors lit up nonstop. Headlines were rewritten, then rewritten again, because no one was certain whether to label this moment an abdication, a crisis, or an unprecedented purge of power in British royal history. Within the first 30 minutes, traffic to royal-related news sites surged to record-breaking levels. Keywords connected to King Charles' abdication and Queen Camilla shot to the top of search rankings across multiple countries. Media analysts later revealed that global traffic had multiplied several times over, compared to the moment of Queen Elizabeth II's death. This was no longer a news story, it was an informational earthquake. Royal betting markets reacted even faster. Within hours, all predictions about succession were completely overturned. William's name immediately rose to the top, while every scenario involving Camilla's continued role was erased from the system. Numbers fluctuated wildly, reflecting a brutal reality. The world had accepted that an era had just ended, even though no one yet understood why. Inside the palace, the scene was far colder. William and Catherine appeared before the public, but did not stand beside Queen Camilla. The gap between them was unexplained. No statement, no official reason. Yet that empty space became the most analyzed detail of all. In a family where every position carries political meaning, such an absence could not be accidental. Camilla herself vanished completely. No images, no statements, no close sources. For many hours, not a single new photograph of her appeared on any mainstream media outlet. This silence did not resemble a communication strategy. It felt like a sudden severance. Commentators began asking questions. Why did a queen who had just been stripped of her titles offer no response at all? Why did the palace make no attempt to ease tensions? And why did King Charles, in the most controversial moment of his life, appear so disturbingly composed? Because the chaos the world was witnessing was in the end only the surface. The sensational headlines, the record-breaking numbers, the opposing theories. All of it was merely the waves above. Behind the palace doors in the days leading up to that morning, a quiet investigation had been underway. No noise, no leaks. And it was that investigation that became the true reason everything collapsed in a single morning. Just hours after King Charles's shocking announcement, global public opinion was quickly torn into two clearly defined camps. There was no gray area, no prolonged neutrality. Either people believed Charles had just carried out the bravest act of a modern monarch, or they believed he was merely a man pushed into the final move of a power game controlled by others. On the first side, King Charles was praised as a symbol of absolute responsibility. Many royal commentators called this the moment he placed the institution above all personal relationships, a king willing to give up the throne when he realized his power could be exploited. In editorials, words such as courage, sacrifice, and justice appeared repeatedly. Charles was portrayed as a man who chose truth over the comfort of power. But on the opposing side, another suspicion spread just as quickly. Many believed that Charles was not the center of this chessboard. They argued that the real force behind everything was Prince William. According to this view, William did not act directly. He allowed his father to make the announcement. But every path led to a single outcome: William becoming king. Analyses began scrutinizing every small detail: the way William stood, the way his eyes moved toward Catherine, the complete absence of Camilla. All of it was interpreted as evidence that this was not an impulsive decision. Some observers even used the word manipulation to describe William's role. They questioned whether this was a carefully staged transfer of power. Public opinion polling figures startled many. Within the first 24 hours, levels of support and suspicion were almost perfectly balanced. Half of the public believed Charles was a hero of the institution. The other half believed he was the highest-ranking piece forced to be sacrificed. Rarely in the history of the British monarchy had public opinion become so deeply polarized in such a short time. The language of the press reflected this division clearly. Some newspapers used moral terms such as responsibility and conscience. Others chose colder phrases such as final move, orchestration, and controlled transfer of power. The same event, but two completely different narratives. And it was precisely this contrast that left the public even more unsettled. Within that chaotic picture, there was one small detail no one overlooked. Catherine remained completely silent. No statement, no brief message, not a single emotional line on any official channel. While every other figure was placed under a microscope, Catherine disappeared from the public conversation in an unusual way. This silence did not resemble avoidance. It resembled absolute discipline. Many assumed Catherine was being placed in an impossible position. But those who understood the British royal family saw the opposite. In a household where every word is weighed, prolonged silence often carries more meaning than any declaration. Because that silence did not come from fear. It was the sign of a secret that could not yet be revealed. And when that secret surfaced, the entire debate about right and wrong would enter a completely different phase. 7 days before the moment that shook the world, Buckingham Palace showed no sign of an approaching storm. Everything on the surface continued along its familiar rhythm. Meetings were scheduled. Updates on the king's health were released with a cautious but reassuring tone. No one knew that within this false calm, a chance moment would open a crack that could never be sealed. That afternoon, King Charles walked slowly through a side corridor leading back to his private office. He stopped not because of fatigue, but because a familiar voice came from the adjoining room. Camilla's voice, low, urgent, unlike the usual polite conversations. Charles had no intention of eavesdropping. But a name was mentioned that made him freeze. Dr. Harland, the head of the medical team monitoring his health for months. The conversation did not last long, but every word seemed to sink straight into the king's stomach. Camilla spoke about files, about adjusting the interpretation of results, about emphasizing the severity beyond what was necessary. And then a phrase was mentioned clear enough to leave no room for misunderstanding. Plan B. Charles stood still. He did not move forward. He did not turn away. He heard Camilla refer to the medical council, to the need to create consensus that the king should step back indefinitely. Not because he was incapable of continuing, but because it would be safer for the institution. At least that was how Camilla framed it. What sent a chill through Charles was not the fact that he was being spoken about behind his back, nor was it the fear of losing power. It was the realization that his own illness was being turned into a tool. The medical reports he had trusted, the meetings he had attended in good faith, all of it may have been distorted from the very beginning. The call ended. The door opened. Camilla stepped into the corridor with a composed expression. She did not see Charles standing just a few meters away. And Charles did not speak. In that moment, he did not feel anger. There was no emotional outburst, no desire for revenge. What he felt was a quiet collapse, as if a foundation he had relied on for years had been pulled away without warning. Charles returned to his study. He sat down. He called no one. He took no notes. He did not react. For several minutes, he simply stared at a medical report lying on the desk, a document he had signed not long ago. For the first time, he asked himself whether he was reading the truth or merely a carefully edited version of it. In his mind, the pieces began to fall into place. The unusual medical meetings, the advice that had become increasingly directive, the strange pauses whenever he asked about recovery timelines. All of it suddenly had a terrifying explanation. The most painful part was not the scheme itself. It was the person behind it. The person he had defended before the public. The person he had chosen to place beside him despite decades of opposition. In that moment, Charles did not think about the throne. He thought about trust and the feeling of betrayal at an age when he believed he had already seen through everything. However, Charles did not act immediately. He understood that a rushed decision would only turn the truth into yet another dispute. Instead of confrontation, instead of anger, he chose a far more dangerous path, to quietly verify the truth. After that silent collapse, King Charles did not seek comfort. He sought truth. And the truth, as he quickly realized, was not in the familiar reassurances of the medical team. It was in the numbers, in the small lines of text, in the details he had never questioned before. The investigation began quietly. There was no official order, no written record. Charles requested access to all medical files related to his health over the past 6 months. When the folders arrived, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Two versions existed simultaneously. Two sets of files with the same dates, the same signatures, but different content at critical points. One described a stable condition with signs of progress. The other emphasized risk, recommended indefinite rest, and warned of possible inability to continue official duties. These differences were not superficial. They lay in the interpretation of test results, in carefully chosen language designed to create a sense of urgency. Charles did not need to be a doctor to know this could not be accidental. He did not raise an alarm. He did not confront the medical council. Instead, he quietly sent a copy to Catherine. No lengthy explanation, just a single line. "Please review this carefully for me." Catherine approached the matter in her own way, not with emotion, but with discipline and caution. She did not read the content first. She traced the path of the documents. Who sent them? Who received them? Who edited them? It was there that Catherine discovered a chain of internal emails that had never been disclosed. These emails did not discuss diagnosis. They discussed strategy, how information should be presented to the media, what options existed if the king refused to reduce his duties. In one email, the phrase Plan B appeared again, this time in a clearer context, preparing a scenario for a temporary transfer of power. Catherine did not react immediately. She understood that any move now had to be absolutely precise. A single mistake could collapse the entire investigation. She forwarded all the data to William, not through secretaries, not through advisors, directly. William absorbed the information with cold focus. He did not read the emails as a son. He read them as someone preparing for the greatest role of his life. William did not search for motives first. He searched for technical traces, metadata, edit timestamps, server addresses. What William discovered made the picture even more disturbing. The medical files had been edited repeatedly within an unusually short period of time. Not once or twice, but dozens of times. Each edit left a trace. A word changed. An assessment emphasized. A warning pushed to the top of the page. The number of people with access to these documents was smaller than officially disclosed. It was not the entire medical council. Only a small group. The same names repeated. The same accounts appeared frequently in the server logs. William compiled the list again. Not many, but enough to form a network of information control. The three of them met in a sealed space. No recording, no assistance, no minutes. The conversation did not last long, but every sentence carried the weight of history. None of them asked why. That question already had an answer. What they needed to do now was not to expose everything immediately. It was to complete the picture. Charles realized that if he acted without sufficient evidence, he would be seen as a paranoid king. William understood that if the process was rushed, the entire royal family would descend into chaos. Catherine kept the rhythm. She emphasized that truth only has value when it cannot be denied. In the days that followed, the investigation continued in the shadows. No leaks, no visible signs. Everything on the outside functioned as usual, but inside each piece was placed exactly where it belonged. The number of times the files were edited, the number of people involved, the timing of medical decisions, all of it formed a logical chain that could not be disputed. When the final picture fully emerged, Charles no longer had any doubt. He was not only facing personal betrayal, he was facing a scheme that could erode the foundation of the entire system. And in that moment, he understood that he had only one possible choice. The confrontation took place in a small, discreet room completely separate from the ceremonial spaces of Buckingham Palace. No advisors, no lawyers, no witnesses, only two people who had walked together through more than half a lifetime, now sitting opposite each other like two sides of a front line that could no longer be concealed. Camilla entered first. She maintained her familiar composure. No panic, no overt defensiveness. She believed she was still in control of the situation. Charles arrived after her. He did not bring a thick folder, only a few sheets of paper neatly placed on the table, as if he had not come to argue but to close something that had lasted far too long. Charles did not circle around the issue. He asked directly about Dr. Harland, about the two sets of medical files, about Plan B. Camilla denied everything immediately. Her voice was firm, her reasoning coherent. She said these were merely misunderstandings, that every decision had been made to protect the king's health, that she had never falsified anything. She emphasized that all of it was simply precautionary measures in the context of Charles undergoing cancer treatment. Charles listened. He did not interrupt. He did not challenge her. When Camilla finished, he gently slid the papers toward her. Not all the evidence, only the parts that could not be denied. The timestamps of file edits, the chain of internal emails, the server access logs, technical details that no emotional explanation could erase. Camilla looked down. Silence. That moment did not last long, but it was enough for Charles to understand that the truth had reached its final limit. The silence was not because there were no excuses left. It was because any word spoken now would only make the situation worse. From a psychological standpoint, this was the moment when Charles could have chosen another path. He could have dethroned. He could have exposed the wrongdoing. He could have kept the crown and removed Camilla from the system of power. But it was precisely here that the most important decision took shape. Charles understood that if he chose to dethrone, everything would turn into an internal purge. The royal family would be dragged into a spiral of accusations. Camilla would become the center of a prolonged legal and media battle. And he himself, as the reigning king, would be placed in the position of both victim and executioner. More importantly, Charles realized that this crisis was not merely the story of a marriage. It was a matter of trust in the institution. If he remained on the throne after exposing the entire scheme, every decision he made in the future would always be suspected of carrying personal motives. Abdication in that context was not retreat. It was the only way to completely sever the cycle of suspicion. By ending his own reign, Charles shifted the focus of the story away from personal conflict. He transformed it into an institutional act, a sacrifice of power to preserve the legitimacy of the throne. And in doing so, he stripped Camilla of any opportunity to counterattack in the role of a victim. The confrontation ended without an accusation, without a farewell. Charles stood up first. He did not look back. Camilla remained seated. For the first time since entering the room, she no longer maintained an appearance of absolute control. The decision was made in that very moment, not at a public announcement before the media, but inside this sealed room. That decision did not only end a marriage, it opened an entirely new reign. The coronation took place faster than anyone had ever predicted. There was no time for prolonged debate, no buffer for emotions to settle. The British royal family entered a transition phase with the cold efficiency of a machine pre-programmed for emergencies. William became King William V in a ceremony that was simplified yet absolutely precise. No display, no celebration. On the face of the new king, there was none of the usual exhilaration of someone who had just reached the pinnacle of power. There was only focus and a pressure that felt almost tangible. William did not ascend the throne as a victor. He stepped onto it as someone accepting a responsibility that could not be refused. Catherine stood beside him with the title of queen. But that change brought no sign of personal ambition. She maintained the calm demeanor the public had long associated with her. In Catherine's gaze, there was no sense of triumph, only a clear awareness that every step taken from this moment onward would be recorded by history. On the other side, Camilla disappeared from all ceremonial events. No title, no symbols, no access to any public role within the royal family. Official statements were released brief and decisive. All of her titles were revoked. No exceptions, no gentle transition period. Camilla was taken to a remote estate isolated from London and from the centers of power. It was not a prison, but it was not a palace. A place comfortable enough to live in, yet isolated enough to eliminate influence. Those who once remained close to her no longer appeared. The media could not gain access. From that moment on, Camilla's life became an almost complete information void. Meanwhile, Charles withdrew from the spotlight just as quickly. He did not attend his son's coronation. He did not appear in public as a former king. Charles chose a quiet retreat. There he began writing his memoirs. Those close to him said that Charles was not writing to justify himself. He was writing to confront his own choices, his past compromises, and the question that had haunted him for many years, whether love could coexist with ultimate responsibility. The theme of duty over love was never mentioned in official statements, but it was present in every action. In Charles accepting the end of his own reign, in the way William assumed power without seeking an approval, and in Catherine's deliberate silence in response to praise. The British royal family entered a new phase with an outward appearance of stability. Order was restored. Rituals functioned smoothly. But beneath that surface, the echoes of the crisis had not fully faded. Because what had happened did not merely change the positions of individuals. It changed how the public viewed power, truth, and the cost of responsibility. Many believed that the nightmare had ended there, that all conspiracies had been exposed, that the monarchy had been purified. But at that very moment, when all eyes were focused on the new reign, another name unexpectedly emerged. It did not begin with an official statement, but with a detail that seemed harmless. During a review of remaining documents after the internal investigation, Catherine discovered a file buried deep within the palace's old archival system. It was not listed under medical records, nor did it belong to administrative files. The file name was deliberately vague, almost as if designed to escape notice. But its metadata made Catherine pause. The creation date aligned it suspiciously with the most tense period between the royal family and the Sussexes. When she opened it, Catherine immediately understood why the file had been buried. It was a copy of a DNA test result, not a test for Harry, not for Archie or Lilibet. It was a test bearing the name Prince George. The shock was not in the numbers or the charts, but in the final conclusion, a conclusion stating that Prince George had no direct biological relationship with the person listed as his father. A single sentence. But if made public, it would be enough to destroy the entire line of succession of the British monarchy. Catherine did not react immediately. She understood that any emotional outburst at this point could become an irreversible mistake. Instead, she passed the file to William and made one request. Verification, no speculation, no assumptions, data only. William traced the technical footprint of the file. The metadata showed it had been edited multiple times, at least 12 times in less than 3 months. Server logs revealed that the file was not created within the palace's official medical system, but uploaded from an overseas IP address, California. As the picture gradually came together, the true target of the conspiracy finally became clear. This was not a personal attack on Catherine or William. This was a direct strike at the throne. If Prince George's bloodline were called into question, the entire line of succession would descend into chaos. And within that chaos, it would only take enough doubt for the monarchy to collapse from within. Catherine understood that silence at this moment would mean complicity. She chose the most dangerous path, publicly releasing the evidence. No ambiguity, no room for media speculation. In a rare press conference, Catherine laid out the entire chain of facts, from the origin of the file to the number of edits to the IP address and the individuals involved. Her voice did not tremble. There was no anger, only the cold composure of a mother protecting her child with truth. The reaction from California came almost immediately. Meghan Markle's silence, which had lasted for years, was suddenly broken by a rapid series of statements. Lawyers spoke. Spokespeople issued denials. Emergency calls were made. But the most striking detail was not what they said. It was the speed of the response. Too fast, as if they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. British legal authorities began to step in. This was no longer a family matter. It was document forgery interference with a national archival system and conspiracy to distort the line of succession. Charges that could not be handled through a television interview. Subpoenas were drafted. Requests for international legal cooperation were sent out. The legal doors were slowly closing. Within the royal household, there was no longer any doubt. This was not impulsive behavior or emotional retaliation. It was a carefully prepared plan designed to create a false truth convincing enough to spread chaos. And if Catherine had not uncovered it in time, a single small leak could have sent British history down an entirely different path. As each layer of the conspiracy was exposed, the British monarchy stood at a historic crossroads. There was no way back. No space left for vague compromises. The truth had been placed on the table. And this time it did not only determine the fate of one family, but the future of an entire dynasty. When the final pieces were set in place, the full picture that emerged was no longer a single scandal, but a chain of tragedies unfolding over many years, many generations, and many flawed decisions. From medical files manipulated in the shadows, to concealed emails, to plots aimed directly at the throne, everything pointed to a bitter truth. The British monarchy did not nearly collapse because of enemies from the outside. It almost fell apart because of fractures from within. In this story, no one is entirely innocent. Charles was not a perfect king. He carried the mistakes of a husband, the hesitation of a father, and the burden of a monarch born to inherit duty, not happiness. Camilla was not merely a controversial woman, but a symbol of compromises allowed to linger too long in the shadows. William was not simply the heir. He was the product of a wounded childhood forced to grow up faster than anyone else. And Catherine, once a woman who stood quietly in the background, became the moral anchor that kept the institution from crossing its final line. The truth did not save love. It did not repair a marriage that had rotted at its roots. It did not erase the wounds accumulated over decades. But the truth did save the institution. It prevented an ancient dynasty from descending into chaos. It forced power to face the light, even when the cost was honor the throne and relationships that could never be repaired. And at the center of it all, there remains one question without a definitive answer. Was King Charles a king of justice who chose truth at any cost to protect the throne? Or was he simply a betrayed man delivering a final strike to reclaim control over his own place in history? The answer may depend on how each of us views power, love, and forgiveness. If you have your own thoughts, leave a comment below. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow the next chapter of the new reign, where history continues to be written day by day.